Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Did you know that in ancient Rome, pants were a symbol of slavery and oppression? A free man would never be caught outside of his own house wearing anything over his genitals. Speaking of symbols, the Mandalorians have changed a lot in their thousands of years of existence, but the one thing that has remained the same is the Mandalorian helmet with its T-shaped visor. Today we're going to be breaking down every Mandalorian helmet that's ever been designed. It's unknown what Mandalore the First looked like. The picture being shown to you right now is just a photo of a male Taung wearing an armored helmet that matched the contours of his very angular face. The Taung were the ancient ancestors of the Mandalorian faction, and most likely also didn't wear pants. The Taungs had a pretty bony face with a pronounced brow. They're generally taller and stronger than humans at an average height of 2 meters and around 95 kilos in weight. That's 6'5", 210 pounds. They were also extremely stubborn and hard to kill. The Taung originated on the world of Coruscant, where they battled against the 12 tribes of Zel, early ancestors of humanity. Although they were outnumbered, their warrior-like culture allowed the Taung to hold their own against the Zel. This fascination with helmets and armor that all Mandalorians share originated with the Taung, who believed that unarmed combat was the most honorable way of fighting. Mandalore the First would go on to establish the Mandalorian Crusaders, roughly around 24,000 BBY, after wiping out the mythosaurs of Mandalore and claiming the planet for themselves. Prior to this, the Taung had been kicked off of their homeworld of Coruscant after finally being defeated by the tribes of Zel. It's during this early settlement of Mandalore that we began seeing the T-shaped visor of the Mandalorian helm, which is not all that different in design from the ancient Greek Corinthian helms that were commonly used by hoplite warriors. After securing Mandalore, these crusaders would begin raiding nearby systems and planets, making a name for the Mandalorians as a very deadly and brutal race of people. In the early days, there was very little standardization in a Mandalorian's armor and helmet. Each individual's gear was different and made out of different materials. In general, though, the T-shaped helmet became a symbol for the Mandalorian Crusaders. This specific helmet would become a symbol of the Mandalore leadership position, and anyone who got their hands on it would become the leader of the Mandalorians. Despite their primitive-looking armor, the Mandalorian Crusaders were already known for fielding some of the most high-tech weapons and gadgets in the galaxy, including the Basilisk war droids. It was during these crusades that the Mandalorians first made contact with the Sith. After Mandalore the Indomitable lost a duel with the fallen Jedi Qualdroma, the Mandalorians were forced into an unholy alliance with the Sith, which almost destroyed their faction and led to the death of Mandalore the Indomitable. The next leader, Mandalore the Ultimate, would spend 20 years rebuilding the Mandalorian clans. Mandalore the Ultimate sought to create a standardized training system and a more structured army, and established the neo-crusaders with the help of his trusted advisor, Cassius Fett. For the first time in Mandalorian history, the Mandalorians had standardized armor, helmets, and weapons. These helmets had a small visor slip that was either just a single line or T-shaped. The helmet would also cover the entire neck area and attach to an individual's chest armor. Not all Mandalorians joined the Neo-Crusaders movement, as it included many things that were alien to the more structuralist Mandalorian way of life. For the first time in their history, the Neo-Crusaders adopted a chain of command, division of labor, along with a uniform coded by color. Basic troopers wore blue, rally masters wore red, field marshals wore yellow, veterans of the front wore silver, and a special group of Jedi who joined the Mandalorians wore gray. If a Neo-Crusader basic trooper impressed their field marshal, which was basically like a non-com or a junior officer, they would then get promoted to shock trooper. This came with a completely new armor package, which included some of the best technology available to the Neo-Crusaders at the time. Notice the breathing apparatus fixed to the helmet. The shock troopers were designed to operate in the most difficult situations, including fighting in vacuum and boarding enemy ships. Unfortunately for the Neo-Crusaders, their Mandalore had also been under the influence of a Sith Lord, which again led to the destruction of their people. The Jedi Knight Revan would challenge Mandalore the Ultimate to a duel and defeat him, and then seize the Mask of Mandalore and hide it. The Mandalorians would never really recover from this massive defeat. They would never gather in such large numbers or carry out another crusade and take over massive swaths of territory. For the next few thousand years, the Mandalorian shock trooper armor would remain a popular design worn by the Mandalorian clans still left. During the Golden Age of the Republic, which lasted from the Ruusan Reformation to the Clone Wars, two more factions of the Mandalorians would emerge. One was the Super Commandos under the leadership of Yaster Muriel. Their armor directly evolved from the shock trooper armor of neo-crusaders and would feature one of the most iconic helmet designs that would be worn by the likes of both Jango and Boba Fett, along with the Mandalorian who saved Baby Yoda from Arvala 7. The Super Commandos, who would become True Mandalorians, were a small army of mercenaries who followed Yaster Muriel's Super Commando Codex, which encouraged honorable behavior while on the job. This was a pragmatic attempt to standardize the Mandalorians brand as bounty hunters who are reliable and efficient at their jobs and strayed away from wanton destruction and unnecessary cruelty. A member of the Super Commandos, Tor Vizsla, felt restrained by these new rules imposed by Yaster Muriel. Vizsla believed that the Codex was leading the Mandalorians astray from their roots as warrior conquerors and also savage raiders. He would establish his own faction known as the Death Watch and start the first Mandalorian Civil War. The Death Watch helmets had a more pronounced T-shape than their true Mandalorian counterparts. The True Mandalorians and the Death Watch would ultimately destroy each other, leading to the rise of the short-lived pacifist New Mandalorian faction. The New Mandalorians were pacifists, but they had their own military or security guard, who wore helmets that were styled after the Corinthian Greek helmets we were talking about before. Because of their pacifist nature, many Mandalorian historians do not consider the New Mandalorians or their armor as a part of Mandalorian lore. The Death Watch would once again re-emerge during the New Mandalorians' rule under the leadership of Pre Vizsla. The helmets they wore were more similar to the classic Super Commando look, but were all painted blue and gray. The newly created Death Watch aligned themselves with Maul and several criminal syndicates, which would ultimately lead to the end of the Death Watch for good after Maul defeats Pre Vizsla and claims the title of Mandalore for himself. Maul would turn the Death Watch back into the Super Commandos and have them paint their helmets red. Many of these human Mandalorians would also add horns onto their helmets to show their allegiance to Maul, who had horns on his head. Some would also draw a clawed hand onto their armor as well. The Super Commandos under Maul would only rule Mandalore for a short time. A clone army led by Ahsoka Tano would eventually besiege Mandalore and take it over. When Maul killed Pre Vizsla, not every Death Watch member was willing to join forces with the Dathomiri crime lord. Led by Bo-Katan Kryze, the sister of new Mandalorian leader Duchess Satine Kryze, the Night Owls would fight against Maul's Shadow Collective, but ultimately had to flee to the Republic and ask for their assistance to take back their homeworld. But shortly after the siege of Mandalore successfully toppled Maul's rule, the Republic reorganized into the Galactic Empire, marking the beginning of the Imperial occupation of Mandalore. Bo-Katan's Night Owls would refuse to bend their knee to the Empire and would have to flee the planet once again, until decades later when Clan Ren led a rebellion against the Empire. Although the Night Owl helmets look very similar to the Death Watch under Pre Vizsla, every helmet was custom painted with a symbol. When the Empire took over Mandalore, Clan Saxon, led by Gar Saxon, quickly pledged allegiance. Gar Saxon became the Viceroy of Mandalore, and his Mandalorian warriors became known as the Imperial Super Commandos. They are equipped by the Empire with heavy Beskar armor and red and white helmets with special sensor packages and visors. The Imperial Super Commandos would also utilize jetpacks, giving them extra mobility in combat. As the Empire's control of Mandalore solidified, more clans would pledge their allegiance to Gar Saxon and would also send fighters to become Imperial Super Commandos. Unbeknownst to most Mandalorians, the Empire was developing a super weapon that could destroy Mandalorian Beskar and make all of their armor useless. The Mandalorian Protectors, or the Mandalorian Royal Guard, usually remained independent from most politics and served as the personal bodyguard or army for the ruler of Mandalore. During the New Mandalorian period, they served as security for the pacifist government, as we mentioned before. Some of these protectors were loaned to the Galactic Republic and used to train clone pilots. After the Imperial takeover of Mandalore, the protectors relocated to the third moon of Concord Dawn, where they had an uneasy alliance with the Empire. Most Mandalorian protectors also doubled as pilots, so their helmets were fitted with breathing apparatuses that looked very similar to what the shock troopers used to wear. Ultimately, Gar Saxon would betray the Mandalorian protectors and destroy most of their numbers. So there you have it, guys. Those are all the various Mandalorian helmet designs. As you can see, the helmet is extremely important as far as the identity of the individual Mandalorian. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.